Welcome to the Pregnancy Help Podcast. I'm Christine Grimmett, and I'm here with Tracie Shellhouse, the Vice President of Ministry Services at Heartbeat International. And we're happy to welcome Joseph Backholm. Joseph is a Senior Fellow for Biblical Worldview and Strategic Engagement at the Family Research Council. And he combines extensive legal, political, and policy experience with a love for the way biblical truth cultivates human flourishing. Our conversation today will revolve around this idea in our culture that says that sexual freedom equals happiness, although we also happen to know that many who are living in a hookup culture actually aren't that happy. We'll also discuss ways to help turn the tide of the culture so that people rediscover the connection between holiness, wholeness, and happiness. If you're a listener who's currently working or volunteering with a pregnancy help organization and you'd like more training on the topic of sexual wellness for your clients, as well as other topics like leadership, fundraising, client care, and more, check out the show links for the registration information on our upcoming annual Heartbeat Conference. Tracie and Joseph, it's great to have you on the show today. And Tracie, I'll turn things on over to you.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Christine. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us today. You and I had the opportunity to meet earlier this year, and conversations with you are just very interesting. You know a lot about a lot of different things, but as we were talking about just some of your sweet spots and what a biblical worldview truly is and how it should inform our conversations and even how we lead and all those kinds of things, you mentioned a topic that I felt was so applicable to pregnancy help, to those that we serve, but even ourselves. It's very important for us to be healthy and whole so that we can serve others and help them on the track of getting there. And so when I said, what's the big thing right now, or one of the things that you're really interested in that you're developing, and you mentioned why sex doesn't make you happy. And I was like, ooh, let's get into that. So culture often sells the idea that sexual freedom equals happiness. We see it all around us on, Facebook and in movies and when people are listening to the radio. Why do you think this message is believed by so many, but also why does it ultimately disappoint and fail in the end?
Yeah, well, thank you, Tracie, and thank you guys for having me today and welcoming this conversation. And I mean, it's appropriate, I think, that we're having it kind of in a pro-life context, because that is kind of how I stumbled into this thesis, because I've been engaged in kind of the policy world around the abortion question and in life in general for a long time. And there's been a lot of contemplation post-Roe about how do we now end abortion, since we have we've corrected course to a degree and recognized that there should not be a fundamental right to kill your children. And that, of course, is progress, but there's still this demand side. And the thing that became clear to me, while, the polling indicates that most of America thinks that abortion is wrong in a moral sense, that it's not good that we have it, but they believe that it's necessary. And why do we think it is necessary? Because we have accepted the premise that the path to happiness is sex. And everyone understands that, well, sometimes when you're having sex and you're trying to get happy, you end up pregnant. And it's not reasonable in the mind of the culture to tell people don't have sex when you're not prepared to be a parent, because they have been catechized into this idea that sex equals happiness. Now, there's a couple problems with that, of course, is that it's not true. And experientially, we understand that. But the consequences of behaving as if it is true are devastating. And if we want to end the demand for abortion, what we have to do is, in my mind, part of what we have to do is destroy the lie that sex is the thing that makes you happy, because we already believe that it's wrong. Once we reject the lie that it's necessary, then we can go back to restoring this culture where every baby really is valued and we don't have people thinking that it's a necessary evil.
Absolutely. So how do we do a better job of teaching that, teaching a theology of sexuality that's both truthful and compassionate and empowering from a biblical worldview?
Well, I think truthful and compassion are synonymous. And of course, they are different words, but I think as believers, we need to see those things as being synonymous, because when you tell people the truth, you are being compassionate to them, because we were created for joy, right? That's, the Westminster Catechism is, what is the end of, the chief end of all man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. God created us for joy. And really the difference between the gospel path to joy and the cultural path to joy couldn't be more distinct. And we understand there's a spiritual, supernatural reason why Satan is saying, oh, God's path to joy is not true, right? But so there's that question of truth and compassion. Once you tell people the truth, this is what you were made for. This is what God created you for. And this is the path through which you will find joy, peace, meaning, purpose, belonging, all of the things that we as humans are wired to desire, and all of those things are good. God also created the path by which we will experience them. And so that is compassion, helping people understand this is your created purpose. This is why you were made. And in doing so, you will find joy, because the only alternative is pretending as if we're made to please ourselves. And in the process of living that out, just finding a lot of misery. And that's kind of where we're at culturally.
Okay. Well, what gives you hope that the tide can be turned, that people will rediscover the connection between holiness, wholeness, and happiness?
Well, there's a lot of things there. My first instinct is to say the thing that gives me hope that can be recovered is that the lie is demonstrably not true. And I think, Gen Zers right now, we've all seen the social science data around how unhappy they are. And they have also fully embraced as a generation, because most of them went to government schools, and this is kind of how they were catechized, in this idea that just live authentically, live your truth, and in doing so, that's how you're going to find happiness. And so they were all like, okay, I'm in. I'm going to live authentically. I'm going to do exactly what I want to do whenever I want to do it. And no generation has ever been less joyful than they are. And we understand why that is. So what's the reason to believe that we can kind of course correct? Is that their lives are evidence, and they are day by day, many of them just coming around to the fact that, yeah, this doesn't work. So what's better? And that's the opportunity the church has. And it really is evangelistic, right? I mean, abortion is connected. It's an adjacent issue, but really this is, from the church's perspective, a huge opportunity to show people, hey, how's that working out for you? Not so well. Let me tell you why. And let me tell you what you were made for, and why we think this is an actual path to joy, why that's not working. So, I mean, one reason why I have great optimism about it is because the alternative cannot work. And it cannot work not because I'm smarter or better looking than anybody, but because the laws of nature are the laws of nature. God organized the world in the way he organized it, and our good intentions are not going to change that. So all we will do is continue to butt up against reality and the pain of disobedience. And so that provides, tremendous opportunities.
So could you give us some examples of how practically we could walk this out, say from a perspective with pregnancy help, at having these conversations, but also I think about the importance of it as parents discipling their children, even what that looks like in the home, because the listeners that we have with this podcast, many of them are having conversations in that coaching and counseling room with those that have bought the lie that sex will make you happy. And I have been sitting in those rooms many times, and you can see the brokenness and the disappointment on their faces. And truly, those that are at a place that they realize that the decisions they're making they're not working, but they don't quite know a better way. So how do we help show them?
Well, I think, from a parental perspective, and basically anybody who is in a position of helping to shape young minds, to me, the root of it goes back to the source of truth. And what God has told us, and kind of, is that he is in charge. He created us. We are the creation. He is the creator. Therefore, he gets to establish the rules, and he made rules for us, for our benefit, for our joy, for our purpose, all of those things. And that when we recognize him as the ultimate source of truth, it goes well for us. And of course, what the culture and the sexual revolution has been telling everybody is there is no supernatural source of truth. There's not even a fixed source of truth. Truth is within you. And as you follow your heart, as you live authentically, as you find your truth, that's the way you find out your own personal path to happiness. And the reason that's so contrary to the gospel is because Scripture is very clear that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. That's how Jeremiah described it, right? And in Scripture, the whole doctrine of sin is based on the idea that the way we feel is not a reliable guide to what is true and what is good and what is helpful. And our feelings are often a temptation away from the truth, not a guide to the source of truth. And of course, feelings are complex. They're not always wrong. God gives us feelings. He made us emotional beings. That's not something we need to be afraid of necessarily. We just need to understand the challenges associated with being emotional creatures in a world filled with sin and temptation and all of those things. So when it comes to like helping young people understand, what a 3-year-old needs to know is that his feelings do not determine what is true. His feelings do not determine what we do. We have an understanding of what is good and what is right and what is healthy, independent of what we feel. And if you can get a young mind and a young heart oriented in that direction, by the time they're 12, 13, 14, and they're trying to push off and be independent and find their own way, if they have a very clear sense that my heart is not a reliable guide to ultimate truth, then they can be oriented around something that is, which is God's word.
So outside of the home, looking at in the pregnancy center, there are many that come in that are clients and they are believers, and yet they've taken a path away from the Lord. There are many that will come through and will say, I know that I'm making bad decisions, or I knew that this was something that I shouldn't do. And those are often easier conversations to have, because even if they're not living out their beliefs, if their values are not driving their actions, we know though what they do truly believe. And we can go back and sort of do a reset on if you believe that, what do you value and how do you walk it out? For those, though, that we're talking to that maybe don't have a biblical worldview because they don't have a relationship with Christ, do you have any suggestions on what those conversations can look like? And of course, our hope is maybe a conversation about the fact that sex doesn't make you happy opens up the door to have a conversation about what you're really made for in relationship in Jesus. But for those that are in the coaching room with someone that goes, oh, well, I don't believe that Jesus stuff. Do you have any suggestions on how that conversation might begin and go?
Well, there's a couple categories of person, because we are emotional creatures, we do not always want to know the truth. And very often people reject the truth, not because we actually don't think it's true, but because we fear the implications of it, because we don't want to change. We don't want to surrender. We don't want to be under anybody else's authority. We want to be in control of ourselves. And that's frankly the whole justification for murdering Jesus when they crucified him, because the evidence that he was the Messiah was so good that the Pharisees got together and said, hey, this guy is a threat to everything that we believe. We're not raising people from the dead. People are going to believe him. And so we have to be done with that, right? And so as believers who really care about other people, the temptation is to believe that if I only say the right thing, the right set of words in the right order, then their heart will be changed. And that's not a reasonable expectation. Jesus was not 100% effective at changing people. And he was, of course, the perfect messenger. So, we shouldn't expect that all the ground is good ground. There is fallow ground, and he's promised us that as well. That being said, if you are dealing with somebody who, doesn't share our theology, but they're humble enough to know that this isn't working, we should, as recipients of grace, right? All of this should be seasoned with grace, the way we would deal with people. Not that I'm better than you and shame on you for getting yourself into the situation. It's that they're by the grace, but for the grace of God, there go I, right? So when they feel that our heart for them is for their good and for their best, they're more inclined to listen to us, and it's not a voice of common denomination. And when that happens, we can, theoretically, what if you were actually made for something else? What if there was a God who made you and told us how to live differently in a way that might actually produce happiness? Could it be that the reason, the choices that you've made and the worldview that you've been operating under, although they probably don't see it that way, could it be that the fact that it's not working well is because that's not how the world is organized? That's not what you were created for. And if you ever want to hear what I think is a better way, I'm eager to tell you, because I want good things for you. I want joy for you. I want joy for your baby, and it's never too late to reorient ourselves and return to our created purpose.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I love the fact that we are created for relationship. God created us for a relationship with Him. And because of that, also, we live out relationship with each other. And often what I would see with those that I would be speaking with and doing options coaching with and those kinds of things is what they're really looking for was relationship. They were looking for connection. They were looking for fulfillment that filled that God-sized hole in their heart. But the world that they live in, what they had been sold was sex is going to do that. That being wanted in this manner is going to do that, rather than understanding that really what we're looking for is to connect. And that is a great place to begin, in that room for connection, but then to also be able to mirror that what you think you're looking for, or what you're seeking isn't what's going to satisfy you. That really what you're made for is something else.
Yeah. And I think we can affirm the desire, right? Because community and love and belonging is something God made us to desire, and He wants for us. And so while we say no to this thing, right, we're always accused of being just kind of wet blankets, and we say no to everything. When we say no to hookup culture, it's because we're saying yes to real, long-term, actually loving relationships, not exploitative relationships. And because we want you to have actual joy, not pretend joy, not temporary joy, not just pleasure. We want you to have actual joy. And when when you frame it that way, it's that I want something better for you than actually what the culture is offering. The reason we say no to that is because we want to say yes to the plan that God has for us, which is so much better than what Freud has for us.
Yes, absolutely. And it's having those conversations that begin that path so often in the pregnancy center, but also in relationships and homes and friendships. There's so many opportunities to be able to cast that great vision. We do know that, there are those that sometimes they feel like they're too far gone. They feel like they've missed the mark, whether often believers, it's almost like they feel like, well, I've gone so far, I can't course correct. And so for those that feel like they've missed the mark, those that maybe feel like, all hope's lost, that they don't have the opportunity to have the blessing that God promises us when we honor sexuality in a way that reflects His moral character. What would you say to them? What would you have them hear?
Well, let's just open up our Bible and let's read about the woman at the well and her five husbands. Let's talk about Rahab, who's in the lineage of Jesus, who was a prostitute, right? Let's talk about David, who committed adultery and then killed the husband, and God still found a way to have him not only in the lineages, but lineage. I mean, and the biblical examples are filled with really, really, really imperfect people. We're not the hero, He is. And that voice of condemnation is another lie. It's the same lie that told you sex makes you happy, right? Because that's what abusers and predators do. They convince you to do the thing that's bad for you, then shame you for doing the thing that's bad for you. It's the exact same source, and we need to identify the source as the enemy of your soul, the person who wants to imprison you in permanent, misery and sadness and self-condemnation. We want to help them be freed from enslavement to that same source. So yeah, the person who got you there is the one trying to keep you there. Don't listen to those lies. Jesus has a better way. He's here to forgive all of us. And we, as the messengers of that, of course, have been in our own ways forgiven. We say this as, co-repenters, not as people who stand in any position of judgment, but just hopefully as testaments of the idea that it's true, that repentance works, that Jesus can forgive us, and that there is a better future.
Well, thank you. I love that. I think it is so important that we understand that we have the opportunity to love people well where they're at. And when we speak with compassion and conviction, I think often people are afraid to be direct, but with compassion and conviction, you can be very direct. You can be very honest. And I do believe that everyone, but especially some of these younger generations coming up, they're hungry for someone that will speak the truth. They're hungry for someone that cares enough to not just tell them what they want to hear and not just tell them what the world's telling them. They're looking for someone that's really willing to invest in them. And, all of the things that you're presenting, that is exactly it, is investing in them and telling them who they are, but also doing it without condemnation so that they see that the same hope that we hold on to, that we have, that we hope that for them also, and to be able to offer it. And I think these type conversations are so important. I believe that is where true understanding of who we are and what we're made for is forged, and it allows for amazing conversation within families as we're raising children. But in the pregnancy help arena, something that I found over the years is there are conversations that sometimes people try to avoid. It's almost like the big thing is she's pregnant right now. We want to be able to give her all of her options so that she can choose life for her baby. And that's true. We want to provide all of that, but we also want her to choose life for herself, because God intends her to have abundant life also. And the conversation that we're having right now, what we're talking about, this topic, this is a huge part of her being able to truly understand and receive abundant life. And so I love the perspective, and I hope those that are listening to this podcast will be encouraged to have more of those conversations, to not think, oh, we'll talk about that later when we get her back in, to understand that these are very affirming conversations where you have the opportunity to say, I see you, and I know you, and I know in whose image you're made in, and let me tell you about the hope. Let me tell you about the hope for the future. So, Joseph, in this conversation, what have I not asked? What would you like to share with the listeners?
Well, there's a lot, but I want to just add on to the point that you were making, because it's a lot, in terms of, are we going to deal with the momentary need, which in many cases is an emergency, and there's a real crisis we're dealing with, right? But there's also this element of, to borrow a phrase from a slightly different context, it's, are we going to give them a fish, or are we going to teach them how to fish, right? That's the worldview part of this, is helping them understand, again, not in judgment, but how you got here, because you were listening to the wrong voices. The source of truth that has been guiding your life is not actually a source of truth. It's a source of lies. And so if we can reorient you to find the actual source of truth, then you are less likely to find yourself in another crisis, because you're going to get better advice. You're going to understand the difference between wisdom and folly. You're going to understand the difference between righteousness and wickedness, and what's good for you and what's bad for you, right? So if we can give them those tools to navigate the next situation, so they aren't once again misled by somebody they liked who had good intentions, who lied to them and they couldn't recognize the lie. If they can recognize that situation next time, then they're less likely to be in a crisis. So yes, we want to help them right now with that moment, but it's even better if we can help them come to terms with, how did I get here? How do I avoid being here again? And that's why worldview matters. What is your source of truth? Who are you listening to? Who should you not listen to? And how do you make sure that the next decision is a better decision?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in those initial visits, there's space for those conversations. And something I would often think about is, this might be the only time I get to speak to this person, and I have the opportunity to affirm them, and also the opportunity to help them possibly understand who they are and who they are created in the image of, because some truly don't know. And then there are others that their worldview is, even those that are professing to be believers, there's a lot of confusion and a lot of misunderstanding. One of the things that I love about what we do is it's crisis intervention. I mean, we're intervening in the midst of that. But I think it's important to remember that a lot of times people focus on the pregnancy as being the crisis, but really it is the lifestyle that they're experiencing on a daily basis that is affecting their heart, that is affecting their mind, their mental health, and their physical body. That really is the crisis. And if we want to intervene and we want to prevent a subsequent crisis and maybe another after that, it is really digging down and having those conversations about what really, really matters. And I love that. Sometimes I would ask people, especially if I was talking with someone that maybe had just, begun, I guess you could say their sexual journey that they're on, and they're young and maybe a high schooler. And I would ask them, are you satisfied? How do you feel? And so often they would go, no, I mean, I thought this was going to make me feel better, and I thought I was going to feel loved, but I'm scared. And then we would we would begin this conversation. We would start developing it, and even explaining to them, the Lord didn't create you so that you could live in fear.
Yeah.
He has promises. And so we want to be able to share that with you. Yeah. All right. So what else?
Well, many years ago now, a wise older man whose children are older than me, and when I lived in Seattle, we had a lot of good conversations of just about raising kids, and he made the point that stuck with me. He said that men play at love to get sex, and women play at sex to get love. And that is it's of course a stereotype, but it's one that is instructive to understand how these dynamics so often work. Is that women believe if we give men the thing that they want, then I will get the thing that I want. And in reality, men are just pretending to care about you to get the thing that they want, and they will quickly, move away when they are low quality, low character men. And sadly, there are many of those out there. And so for women to understand that dynamic of how easy it is to be fooled by a desire that is so good. I want someone to love me, and we want someone to love them, but actually love them. And doing that thing that you think is going to get you love is actually a dead end, which is why God has a very different plan for sexuality. That it's wonderful, it's a gift in context, and when it's out of context, then it is explosively dangerous. And that's in my kind of studies and discussion of this whole idea why sex doesn't make you happy. Not only does sex not make you happy, sex out of context is probably the most destructive cultural force there is, because you can connect every social ill we have, and I'm talking like mental health problems, we're talking substance abuse, we're talking crime, we're talking poverty, we're talking lack of educational achievement. Every one of those social ills can be connected to the fact that somebody had sex with somebody they weren't married to. Because all of those things are generally connected to fatherlessness, and fatherlessness 99% of the time is not the result of a death of a father. It's the result of, either a broken family or a family that never came together. So, you could literally solve in the West, we could solve all of our social problems, from poverty to crime to mental health, all of it, if nobody had sex with somebody they weren't married for 30 years. And the fact that that is true, and it is demonstrably true, is a really good sign, and it's really good evidence of the fact that actually the framework that God gave us for sexuality is really good. That if we all did that thing that God said is really good for us, it turns out most of our social problems immediately disappear. And you don't have to share our theology to understand that, right? This is something that you can just go into the culture, go to the education system, go to the hospital system, go to the judicial system, go to the criminal justice system, and start talking to people. What is the impact of fatherlessness and broken homes in your community? And without exception, they'll all be like, it's devastating. If the world was filled with men and women who only had sex with their spouse and were faithful to each other until death, all the problems go away. It's not entirely true because there's still sin in the world, but all of the systemic cultural challenges that we have go away. And that just points to the fact that there is a design, and the design that we see in Scripture is actually really good for us.
Absolutely. I used to share sometimes, I would compare sex to fire when you're talking about like a force of nature, and that when you're camping, if you have a fire within that fire ring, it's good. It can keep you warm. It is something that you can cook on. It provides light. Mm-hmm. There's all good things. But if you allow it outside that ring, it can become very destructive. It can burn down entire forests and homes. Yeah, absolutely.
Burn down an entire town, right? It's a metaphor. Right. Once the fire gets out of where it belongs, it is exceedingly destructive. And it doesn't mean fire is inherently bad. It's just bad in the wrong place. And it can be destructive. And in all of life, right? It's the more powerful a tool can be for good and creating another eternal soul. There's no more good than that, right? So sex is the most powerful force for good that God gave us as a species, and we get to do it together. And so the corollary, of course, or the inverse of that, is that it is equally powerful in a destructive way if and when it is abused. And that's what the culture is telling us, that abuse it. The abuse of it is the thing that's going to make you happy. And of course, that was never true. And the evidence is mounting that is not true.
So as I hear you saying that, that's the message that I think so many people need to hear. Rather than the don't have sex or it's destructive, it is good. It is good. It is a force for good. It creates families.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that I think is very important. One of the things that I've seen over the years is a lot of times as we're trying to protect, we have a tendency to focus more on the don't do that. With your children, it's like, don't do that, don't do that. But really, to cast the greatest vision and to allow people to step into something that is joyful, I think it's better instead to say, do this. And so really, as you were saying that, your last statement, that's what I was hearing is it is good. Let's explain how it's good. Let's explain the purpose. That's the declaration,
That's right.
that we should be putting out there and in church, in our homes, in the pregnancy center, everywhere we go. It is good. It is good. It's when it's abused. And when you are living a lifestyle of sexuality that doesn't reflect God's moral character, that is when it becomes dangerous and painful. When it becomes sin, because it's like fire, good or bad. The act of sex is one thing, but it is the way we honor it, whether we're honoring it according to God's moral character, that makes it a good thing, or not honoring his moral character is then when it becomes a bad thing in our lives.
Yeah. All of life is an opportunity cost, right? And when you say yes to plan A, that means you say no to plan B. And when we say yes to taking a 747 across the country, we're saying no to taking a covered wagon across the country. And it's not because we hate covered wagons. It's just that 747s are better. And so when I say no to, promiscuity and hookup culture and all of those things, it's not because I hate sexuality. It's just that there's a way better way to get where I'm trying to go than a covered wagon. And I'm going to choose that because now we have 747s. And isn't that wonderful? And we happen to know the path and the plan that is better. So when we choose the good path, that means we say no to all the diversions, right? And there's lots of Pilgrim's Progress analogies there that we can pull up as well, is that you can't do everything. And so when you do the good thing, that means you don't do the bad thing. And does that mean we're, Captain No? No, it just means we're saying yes to the best. And that's what we're trying to encourage people to do. And there's lots of evidence that is in fact true.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I've so enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure our listeners are too. Do you have anything else that you would like to, like a capstone or a parting word that you would like to add before we hand it back over to Christine?
We've said it a few times, and it's just, helping young people understand that God's plan for us is good. It was not to ruin our joy. It was to give us real joy. And the voices that come in and say, "Oh, you're just trying," that is the deceiver. It is the liar. It is the enemy of your soul who hates you because he hates everything that God created. And his singular desire is to destroy you and take you to hell with him. And when we recognize that's where those lies are coming from, and we really, you will either be transformed by the renewing of your mind, or you will be conformed to this world. And that's Romans 12's framing. And the more we just know and understand and meditate on the truth, then the easier it is to avoid the things that will trip us up. And then it becomes easier to just walk in what God intended for us.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for the conversation. Because of some of the other conversations we've had, I know that you have a wealth of knowledge, and you have some very articulate ways of delivering information that we need within our community. For those that would like to maybe read more of your work or hear more about what you're doing, what you're presently doing, where would you direct them if they want to learn more about a biblical worldview and how they can be intentional about being able to not only that be their worldview, but then to be able to articulate it to others?
Yeah. Well, I'm a variety of places. Maybe the easiest is my website, which is my name, josephbackholm.com. You can find me there. I also write for the Family Research Council, frc.org, for World Opinions. You can find me there, and kind of on the socials as well. I'm on X, Twitter, Facebook, some of those things as well. So if you have my name, there's only one of me on the planet. And that, for marketing purposes, that's easier. You're not going to confuse me with anybody. But, if I can help other people, it is a joy to do it. And, when you change people's thoughts, you change their lives. And that's what we're trying to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joseph. And Christine, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Tracie. Thanks, Joseph. I think our listeners are really going to find hope in this conversation. And for those who are having those conversations, maybe in the schools or in the pregnancy center or the maternity home, and just having those one-on-one, I hope that you recognize how you're helping to turn the tide of the culture. And if you enjoyed this conversation, if you found it inspirational, maybe send it to someone else that you know who's also in that work, and it'll inspire them with new ways that they can reach their clients, their students with this message. We also encourage our listeners to subscribe. We have more content coming your way that will, help care for your clients, help care for our culture as we're working to build a culture of life. So with that, we wish everyone a blessed rest of your day. And thanks for listening to this episode of the Pregnancy Help Podcast.